will do a little visualization with you, an exercise. Imagine a black dot moving back and forth in one dimension, like a bead on a string. And next, imagine it in 2 dimensions, like a billiard ball zooming around a billiards table. And then in 3 dimensions, like a bouncy ball trapped in a box. And finally, in 4 dimensions, like, I don't know what it's like. None of you do, and no one in the world knows what it's like. Mathematically speaking, the step from 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions isn't a very big deal. But for us, it's an insurmountable chasm. That's because our brains have 3-dimensional spatial reasoning hard-coded into their neural circuitry. There are actually good reasons for doing this. The brain's design makes a trade-off between flexibility and performance. And understanding the strengths and weaknesses of this trade-off is really important for using your brain effectively. So none of us live in the real world, in the sense that each of us experiences a unique 3D simulation of the world that our brain assembles based on the sensory information that it collects. We now know what a daunting feat this is, because 3D modelling and video processing are some of the most computationally intensive things you can do. Which makes the fact that we see constantly a little bit surprising, because generally speaking, evolution is ruthlessly energy efficient. Yet we treat this 3D modelling like it's a free resource. Walking around, computing trees blowing in the wind, things off in the distance, things that have no meaning to us, whatever, let's just compute them anyway. The reason we can do this is because our neural hardware for computing 3D spatial computations is spectacular. It was one of the very first things that the early central nervous system started to develop, and it's been in development for that whole time, and it's been made incredibly energy efficient. In contrast, some of the newer parts of the brain are horribly inefficient. So if I were to ask Shane here to perform for me some multiplications of 3-digit numbers in his head, you would be able to see the pupils in his eyes visibly dilate. The glucose levels in his bloodstream would drop. And if he did it for more than a few minutes, he would start to feel physically exhausted. Yet these multiplications are trivial compared to the spatial calculations that he's doing every waking moment of every day of his life. The easy calculation seems so hard, and the hard calculation seems so easy. This neural computational conundrum has an analogy in the world of silicon computing, because hardware development has long been driven by gaming, and gamers want good graphics. Graphics quality comes down to your graphics card, which is basically just a microchip which has been highly specialized to perform a few specific types of algorithms really, really well, can't do anything else. And due to the sort of disproportionate amount of research and development that went into graphics chips, the price performance of graphics chips relative to normal CPUs just accelerated away. And research groups investing millions of dollars in supercomputers started to take notice. If they could take what they were trying to compute and map it into a format that could be fed and processed by graphics cards, they could perform them much faster and much, much cheaper. And that's what started to happen. We humans are in a very similar position to these researchers. Our brains are like a pathetic DOS-based 1970s processor hooked up to some pimped-out, amazing, futuristic graphics card. For example, if your colleague gave you a spreadsheet with 10 years of a company's quarterly earnings, one of the first things you might do is put it into a graph to make it easier to read. But actually, a graph is a fundamentally more obfuscated way to present data than numbers. In order to sort of get meaning out of a graph, you have to do kinds of interpolation and visual approximation. You just made the problem harder, but you put it in a format that can be processed by your graphics card. And that's why visualization is so critical to human reasoning, because it's a process of reformatting problems that are compatible with our most powerful computational hardware. And the power of 3D thinking isn't just limited to computation. It's also critical to memory. For example, If I were, the text, take the text of my speech here today. It doesn't occupy a lot of data. But if I were to give you that text for an hour and then ask you to recall it the next day, you would find that pretty difficult. In contrast, if I invited you to come over to my apartment for an hour, I could probably come to you even a month later, and you would be able to vividly recall what my apartment looked like. Its floor plan, the shape of the furniture, the textures of the surfaces, the way the lighting created shadows, an absolutely staggering amount of data stored in your neurons, and you can recall all of it really easily. The power of visual memory is not a modern discovery. In fact, we've kind of almost lost that knowledge over the last few centuries. Before the printing press was invented, training your memory was a normal part of the standard education. In treatises going all the way back to ancient Greece, the art of memory has always centered on the same thing, forming vivid, visual narratives of the abstract information that you're trying to remember. So to summarize, our personalities are computations, and understanding their algorithms are the key to understanding ourselves. We only get one set of hardware, and it's up to us how we use it. And when it comes to what the brain has to offer, what you see is what you get.